No one ever noticed how early Maria Alvarez woke up because the world wasn't looking yet. At 4037 every morning, her alarm buzzed softly in a small apartment in Bakersfield, California, careful not to wake the walls or the neighbors or the children sleeping in the next room. She sat up slowly, letting the weight of the day settle before her feet touched the floor. Outside, the street was still dark, empty, except for a stray cat and a streetlight that flickered like it was tired too. Maria didn't sigh. She didn't complain. She moved. She pulled on her uniform pants, folded neatly the night before, and tied her hair back the same way she always did. In the kitchen, she packed 2 lunches with practiced hands, one with extra fruit, one with a note written in careful letters. The coffee maker hummed, filling the quiet with warmth. For a moment she stood there holding her mug, staring at nothing, gathering herself. There was no dramatic music in her life, just routine, just responsibility, just another day where everything depended on her showing up. And she always did. But this morning was heavier than most. Maria's first job was at a diner just off Highway 99, the kind truckers stopped at before sunrise. The floors smelled faintly of bleach and old coffee, and the booths held stories no one remembered. Maria wiped counters, poured coffee, smiled when spoken to. Customers asked how she was doing. She always said, good. Not great, not terrible, just good. Her shift ended before noon, but her day never did. During her break, she sat alone in a vinyl booth and counted tips carefully, stacking bills in neat piles. She thought about rent, about groceries, about shoes her youngest was growing out of too fast. She didn't think about herself. There wasn't time. When the shift ended, she clocked out quietly, thanked the cook, and stepped back into the sun. Her phone buzzed with a reminder, pick up Sophia from school at 3. She smiled slightly at the name, tucked the phone away, and walked to her car. And the hours ahead were already spoken for. The apartment Maria shared with her 2 children wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, thin walls, an air conditioner that rattled when it worked, but it was clean. Every surface had a purpose. Every corner told a story of careful budgeting. After picking up Sophia and her older brother Lucas, Maria listened as they talked about their day, nodding at the right moments, asking questions even when her mind was tired. At home, she helped with homework while stirring rice on the stove. The TV stayed off. Silence was cheaper. When Lucas asked why she never came to school events, Maria smiled and said she was proud of him anyway. He didn't push, he was learning early too. Later, while the kids ate, Maria sat with them, though she wasn't hungry. She watched their faces instead, memorizing the way they looked right now. And night was approaching fast. By evening, Maria changed uniforms again. This one smelled like cleaning supplies and old fabric. Her second job was at a small office building downtown, where lights stayed on long after the workers went home. She cleaned desks that held family photos, vacuumed floors that would be dirty again by morning. The building echoed when she walked, her footsteps the only sound. Sometimes she paused by a window, looking out at the empty streets below. The city looked calm from up here, unaware of how many people were still working just to keep it running. Maria finished her rounds, locked doors, and signed her name on a clipboard no one ever read. She drove home under streetlights, exhaustion pressing in but never breaking through. Complaining wouldn't change anything, so she didn't. And tomorrow was already waiting. Sleep never lasted long enough for Maria. It came in pieces, broken by the sound of passing cars, by thoughts she couldn't fully turn off. When morning returned, she rose again without hesitation. The children's clothes were laid out, lunches packed, backpacks checked twice. At school drop-off, she kissed their foreheads and reminded them to be kind. She watched them disappear through the doors before turning back to her car. There was a moment then, just a second, where she sat still, hands on the steering wheel, breathing slowly. No one saw it. Then the engine started, and the day continued. At the diner, a regular asked why she always looked tired. Maria smiled and poured his coffee anyway. Tired didn't feel like the right word. It felt more like being stretched thin without tearing, and the stretch was beginning to show. One afternoon, the school called while Maria was scrubbing a floor. Sophia had a fever. Maria apologized to her supervisor, left early without arguing, and drove fast but careful. At home, she tucked Sophia into bed, laid a cool cloth on her forehead, and sat beside her until the breathing evened out. Bills waited on the counter, unopened. Dinner was simple that night. Lucas ate quietly, watching his mother more than his food. Maria noticed but said nothing. Later, when the apartment was still, she paid what she could and set the rest aside. Numbers didn't scare her, uncertainty did. And uncertainty was becoming familiar. On weekends, Maria cleaned other people's houses. She worked while her kids stayed with a neighbor, leaving small notes in case they woke up early. In quiet living rooms, she dusted shelves filled with framed vacations and family gatherings. She moved carefully, respectfully, never lingering. Sometimes she wondered what it would feel like to come home to a place already clean, already calm. She never stayed with that thought long. It wasn't useful. On the drive home, she stopped at a gas station and bought the cheapest snacks she could find, a small reward for the kids. And small joys were carefully measured. One night, Lucas asked why she never talked about their father. Maria paused, choosing her words slowly. She said, "Some people leave without meaning to hurt anyone." Lucas nodded, not fully understanding but accepting it. Maria kissed his head and turned off the light. In the dark, she sat alone at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cold mug. She didn't cry. She simply sat there, steady, until it was time to sleep. And the silence held more than words ever could. As the weeks moved forward, Maria learned how to measure time differently, not by calendars or clocks, but by small changes she noticed only because she was paying attention. Sophia's cough faded into a softer sound at night. Lucas's shoes wore thin at the heels faster than they used to. The fridge emptied quicker than expected. At the diner, the seasons changed through the windows. Winter mornings gave way to pale spring light, then longer afternoons that made the exhaustion harder to hide. Maria's body adjusted without permission. Her back ached more often. Her hands stayed rough no matter how much lotion she used. Still, she never called in sick. On her days off, if they could be called that, she washed clothes late into the night so the machines were free. The laundromat hummed with tired people and tired stories. Maria folded carefully, stacking each piece with purpose. Across from her, a woman complained loudly about her job, her life, her bad luck. Maria listened politely, nodding at the right moments. When the woman asked how she was holding up, Maria smiled and said, "We're okay." She meant it in the broadest sense. Okay meant surviving. Okay meant getting through. On the drive home, she passed empty fields and quiet streets, the sky turning soft pink above the road. For a moment, she let herself imagine rest. Just for a second. And the thought lingered longer than she expected. School sent home a flyer about a field trip. The cost wasn't high, but it wasn't small either. Maria held the paper while standing in the kitchen, rereading the numbers. Sophia watched her closely. Maria smiled and said they'd figure it out. Later that night, Maria counted tips again, slower this time. She moved money from one envelope to another, adjusting plans without writing anything down. She'd been doing this long enough to remember it all. At work the next day, she took an extra shift without being asked. Her supervisor noticed and thanked her. Maria nodded and kept working. Gratitude felt uncomfortable. It made things feel temporary. When she finally signed the permission slip, she did it with calm hands. She packed the flyer into Sophia's backpack before school and kissed her cheek. Sophia hugged her back hard, like she already understood something important, and the sacrifice passed quietly between them. One evening, Maria arrived home later than usual. The office building had needed extra cleaning after a long meeting. When she opened the door, Lucas had already helped Sophia with her homework. The apartment smelled like rice and canned beans. Maria stopped in the doorway for a moment, surprised. Lucas shrugged, suddenly shy. Maria thanked him, her voice soft but steady. They ate together at the small table, sharing the simple meal. Maria listened more than she spoke. She realized then that her children were learning from her, not through words, but through watching, through silence, through consistency. After they went to bed, Maria sat alone again. This time she allowed herself to lean back in the chair, just for a moment, and the moment felt earned. Later that night, Maria stood at the window, looking out at the street below. A couple walked past, laughing. A car slowed at the corner, then disappeared. Life moved on without noticing her, and she was used to that. She thought about how often she'd been asked why she never complained. The truth was simple. Complaining took energy she didn't have. Hope lived in action, not words. She turned off the light and went to bed, setting the alarm for another early morning, and tomorrow would ask everything again. Summer arrived without warning, settling into the apartment like warm dust that never quite cleared. The air conditioner worked harder than it should have, rattling through the afternoons, but Maria never turned it off completely. Comfort mattered, especially for the kids. She adjusted her schedule again, waking even earlier so she could finish her diner shift before the heat became unbearable. The walk from the parking lot to the kitchen doors felt longer now, the sun already high by the time she tied her apron. Sweat gathered at her collar before the first customer sat down. Still, she smiled. Still, she moved with purpose. At home, Sophia complained once about the heat, then stopped herself when she saw Maria's face. Maria told her it was okay to complain. Sophia nodded, but stayed quiet anyway. That night, Maria lay awake listening to the fan move, warm air across the room. She counted breaths instead of worries, and the season pressed closer. One afternoon, the car wouldn't start. Maria turned the key again, then again, her jaw tightening just slightly. Lucas watched from the passenger seat, sensing the shift. Maria asked a neighbor for help, thanked him more times than necessary, and rearranged her day silently. She arrived late to work and stayed late to make up the time. No one scolded her. No one asked why. On the drive home, she held the steering wheel carefully, like it might disappear if she loosened her grip. At dinner, she laughed at something Lucas said, the sound surprising even herself. It felt unfamiliar, but good, and even fragile moments found their way in. The school year crept closer, bringing lists and fees and expectations. Maria bought supplies one at a time, spreading the cost across weeks. She stood in aisles comparing prices, choosing practicality over color, need over want. At night, she labeled notebooks with careful handwriting. Sophia watched, resting her chin on the table. She asked if her mom was tired. Maria said yes, but smiled anyway. Tired wasn't something to fear, it was something to manage, and managing had become second nature. Late one evening, after both jobs were done and the apartment was finally quiet, Maria allowed herself a long shower. The water ran warm over her shoulders, washing away layers of the day. She closed her eyes and stood still, not thinking about tomorrow or bills or time. Just the sound of water, the steady rhythm. When she stepped out, she felt lighter, not rested, but grounded. She set her alarm again and went to bed without a word, and the quiet carried her forward. By the time fall arrived, Maria could feel it in her bones before the weather report ever mentioned it. The mornings grew cooler, and the light came later, slipping through the blinds like it was unsure where it belonged. She added an old sweater to her routine, one she'd owned for years, soft from use. At the diner, customers talked about holidays coming up, about plans and time off. Maria listened while refilling coffee cups, filing the words away without letting them settle. Holidays meant more shifts, more cleaning, more hours that paid just enough. At home, Lucas started middle school, taller now, quieter in a way that surprised her. Sophia asked questions about everything, her curiosity bright and constant. Maria tried to answer them all, even when she was tired. Some nights, after everyone was asleep, Maria sat at the small kitchen table and reviewed the week ahead. Her handwriting filled the margins of old notebooks. Schedules overlapped, responsibilities stacked. She didn't feel overwhelmed, she felt prepared. And preparation was how she stayed standing. One evening, the diner hosted a small birthday gathering for a regular customer. There was cake left over, and the cook insisted, "Maria, take some home." She hesitated, then accepted. At the apartment, she placed the cake on the table like it was something rare. Sophia's eyes lit up. Lucas smiled in a way he didn't often anymore. They shared it carefully, small slices, laughing quietly. Maria watched them, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. The moment felt full, complete in a way she couldn't explain. Later that night, as she washed dishes, she caught her reflection in the window. Lines had deepened around her eyes. She looked older than she felt. But there was something steady there too, something unbroken, and she held on to that thought. At school, a teacher called Maria in for a meeting about Lucas. He was doing well, the teacher said. Responsible, reliable. The words sounded familiar. Maria thanked her and listened as expectations were laid out. On the walk home, Lucas asked if he'd done something wrong. Maria shook her head and told him she was proud. He nodded, absorbing it quietly. That night, Maria noticed how he set the table without being asked, how Sophia folded laundry with care. They were growing into the spaces she'd made for them. The realization brought a tightness to her chest, not sadness exactly, something deeper. And the years were moving faster now. As winter returned, Maria adjusted again. Thicker blankets came out, the heater ran sparingly. She worked longer hours at the office building, the quiet halls echoing her footsteps. One night, while emptying trash bins, she found a family photo left behind on a desk. She straightened it gently before moving on. At home, she tucked her kids in and lingered longer than usual at their doorways, watching, remembering. She didn't know what the future would look like. She only knew what had carried them this far, and something meaningful was taking shape in the silence. The winter after Lucas turned 13 was quieter than the ones before it, not because life had become easier, but because everyone had learned how to move without making noise. Mornings began before the sun again, the apartment still wrapped in cold. Maria layered clothes on the kids before waking them fully, letting them stay half asleep a little longer. She brewed coffee and stood by the window, watching her breath fog the glass. Outside, the street was empty, the city still resting. She thought about how many years she had lived like this, how many mornings had passed with the same careful steps. At the diner, business slowed with the season. Tips were lighter. Maria adjusted without panic. She took an extra cleaning shift downtown, the office building quieter now, echoing with her footsteps and the hum of machines. One night, she finished later than usual and stood alone in the lobby, keys in hand, looking at her reflection in the glass doors. She looked tired. She looked steady. She looked like someone who had learned how to hold a life together without instructions. She locked the doors and stepped into the cold, pulling her coat tighter. The walk to her car felt longer, but she didn't rush it, and the night seemed to watch her go. As the months passed, small changes began to appear, almost too subtle to name. Lucas started talking about plans beyond school, tentative ideas he didn't fully believe yet. Sophia grew more confident, louder in her laughter, quicker to help. Maria listened, encouraged, nodded. She didn't push. She understood timing. One afternoon, the school hosted a small open house. Maria rearranged her shifts to attend, standing in the hallway while teachers spoke about progress and potential. She felt out of place, surrounded by parents who seemed less tired, more certain. Still, she stood tall. When Lucas introduced her to a teacher, there was pride in his voice. Maria felt it then, quietly, like warmth spreading. That night, back at the apartment, she sat alone after the kids went to bed. She didn't open bills. She didn't plan schedules. She simply sat, listening to the building settle, to distant traffic, to her own breathing. And for once, the silence felt gentle. Time continued the way it always does without asking permission. Spring returned, softening the edges of the city. Maria noticed flowers pushing through cracks in the sidewalk near the bus stop. She noticed them because she had learned to notice small things. At work, a new server asked how she managed 2 jobs and kids without ever complaining. Maria laughed softly, surprised by the question. She said, complaining never fixed what needed doing. The server nodded, unsure what to make of that. Maria went back to wiping counters. At home, she helped Sophia with the school project late into the evening. They cut paper, glued photos, talked about dreams without naming them. Maria watched her daughter's hands move confidently and felt something loosen inside her. She realized then that not complaining hadn't meant feeling nothing. It had meant choosing where to place her energy. And she had placed it here, and the choice had shaped everything. Years later, no one will remember how often Maria skipped meals, or how many nights she worked under fluorescent lights while the city slept. There will be no record of the mornings she woke up tired and kept going anyway. What will remain are 2 grown children who know how to stand on their own, who learned stability from watching someone practice it every day. Maria never needed to complain to prove how hard it was. Her life spoke quietly for itself, in routines, in presence, in showing up again and again. And maybe that's how most strength exists, not loud, not celebrated, but steady enough to hold others up without being seen. And some stories are felt long after they end.